The sky over Chicago is not bleeding. It is screaming. It begins not with an invasion, but with a malfunction, a catastrophic failure of human ingenuity, the kind Cecil Stedman has spent decades preparing for, yet whose sheer, elegant horror still manages to ice the blood in his veins. Deep beneath the GDA's secondary research annex in Ravenswood, Project Chimera has been active for 18 months. Its goal? To decode, replicate, and ultimately weaponize the unique biosignature of a Viltrumite. Not just their strength, but the fundamental quantum resonance of their cellular structure, the key to their preternatural durability and energy absorption. The lead scientist, Dr. Eris Thorne, called it a symphony of applied metaphysics. Cecil had approved it because in a world where Nolan Grayson could decide to peel the planet like a fruit at any moment, understanding the tune was the only way to one day change it. The breach occurs at 3 hours, 47 minutes, and 12 seconds CST. The final phase involves a directed energy siphon attempting to tune a stable quantum pocket to the Viltrumite harmonic. The pocket holds, the tuning does not. A feedback loop, instantaneous and infinite, tears through the calibration matrices. The singularity, designed to be a self-contained echo, does not collapse. It expands. There is no sound from the epicenter. Sound is a function of atmosphere, and the atmosphere within the initial sphere of effect is unmade. A kaleidoscope of screaming, non-Euclidean colors bleeds into reality, not as light, but as a corrosive truth, a visual proof that the laws of physics are negotiable. It swallows 6 city blocks in a silent, shimmering wave that does not vaporize, incinerate, or crush. It reduces. Matter, steel, concrete, glass, flesh, is simplified to its base molecular components, then to atoms, then to a lukewarm, inert quantum foam that sprinkles like gray snow at the event horizon's edge. There is no rubble, only a perfectly smooth, glassy crater deepening by the second, ringed by a zone of frenzied disintegration where structures and people half exist, stretched and mirrored into impossible geometries before popping out of existence. Cecil Stedman watches from the eyrie, his jaw a granite line. The holographic displays paint his face in pulses of emergency crimson and sickly dimensional violet. Casualty projections, he says, his voice devoid of all inflection, a controlled detonation of its own. The numbers flash on the central screen, cold and definitive, 120,000 minimum. 300,000 in the predicted expansion path within 10 minutes. Continental instability likely if breach reaches the mantle. A junior analyst, fresh from MIT and not yet inured to the GDA's daily apocalypses, gags, and vomits quietly into a metal wastebasket. The acidic smell mingles with the sterile, recirculated air. Cecil does not blink. He does not rebuke the young man. This is the calculus. This is the world. Disaster. Triage. Contain the narrative. Contain the damage if you can, but always, always contain the narrative first. He mobilizes what he has left. The guardians of the globe are shadows of their former selves. The immortal is dead again, his body still regenerating in a vat. War Woman is on a deep space monitoring mission. Martian Man is unpredictable. His psyche still frayed from his last encounter with a Viltrumite-level threat. He sends Adam Eve, Duplicate, and Shrinking Ray. They are firefighters facing a sun. Eve tries to reconstitute matter at the edge, but her power falters against the unraveling quantum state. She can't define what should be in a place where the rules are gone. Kate's duplicates are erased the moment they touch the shimmering field. Ray shrinks to avoid the effect, but cannot affect it. They are bystanders to an autopsy of reality itself. Cecil's mind works through the options, discarding them like used shells. Conventional weaponry is meaningless. Dimensional dampeners are offline, fused by the initial pulse. The only tool left in the box, the one he has used before in cleaner, more remote circumstances, glows with a terrible logic on his console. A tactical nuclear strike, not on the breach, but on the space around it. A calculated fusion blast to sever the dimensional instability by overwhelming it with raw energy. It might work. It will definitely turn the Chicago crater into a radioactive lake of glass, and the fallout pattern will poison the Midwest for a generation. The loss of the city, the sacrifice of the survivors at the edges, is already factored into his mental spreadsheet. A brutal, simple equation. One city for a continent, for a planet. He inputs the final authorization codes. The system asks for confirmation. His finger hovers over the holographic key. Then, from within the heart of the shimmering devastation, a new light emerges. Not the cold, hungry technicolor of the rift. This is a warm, radiant gold, tinged with the hopeful blue of a Earth sky. A blue and red streak moving faster than any GDA sensor can track, faster than any sensor on Earth, period, weaves through the collapsing, fractalizing spires of the remaining buildings. It does not attack the rift. It is not confronting the anomaly. It is catching. A city bus, sheared in half by a plane of disintegrating space, tumbles end over end, passengers screaming behind windows that are melting into paisley patterns. The streak intercepts it, and the bus slows as if lowered by invisible cables, settled onto a patch of stable ground with a gentleness that belies its tonnage. A 50-story apartment tower, its foundation dissolved, groans and begins a lethal pivot. A figure appears at its base, shoulders set against the mountain of steel and glass. The building shudders, stops. The figure's boots sink 6 inches into the asphalt, but he holds. He is not stopping the collapse of reality. He is holding back the consequences, buying seconds, inches, breaths. Superman does not punch. He saves. From the chaos, other forms solidify, as if emerging from the world's desperate need. A shadow darker than the void between stars coalesces on a leaning girder above the crater's lip. Batman, his cowl's lenses whirring through spectral filters, scans not just for structural collapse points, but for the faint, fading heat signatures buried in the still chaotic quantum residue. His hands fly over a wrist-mounted controller. Nearby, a GDA evacuation drone, its programming scrambled, suddenly reorients and zips toward a cluster of life signs Batman has identified, deploying nano bandages and stabilizers. He has hacked their network in 3 seconds. He is not a participant in their operation. He is its new director. A lasso glows like captive sunlight, its light pure and definitive against the unreality of the rift. Wonder Woman has looped it around the central pillar of a crumbling train overpass, her muscles corded like steel cable. Her boots carving trenches in the street as she pulls, not to topple it, but to guide its fall away from a stalled evacuation convoy. The strain on her face is not just physical. It is a pained, empathetic effort, as if she feels the suffering of the city in her own sinew. The flash becomes a blizzard of movement. Not one man, but 1,000 afterimages, a river of scarlet lightning that flows up collapsing stairwells, across unstable floors, through the maze of panic. Each image carries a child, an elderly person, a wounded first responder. They appear at triage zones 5 miles away, deposited with care before the speedster blurs back into the maelstrom. He is not just moving people. He is creating a statistical miracle, evacuating hundreds per second from the very teeth of the disintegration front. His path so precise, he runs on individual grains of concrete that haven't yet been erased. And high above, Green Lantern's will makes thought into matter. His constructs are not weapons, not swords or cannons. They are splints and shields and ramps and protective bubbles. A giant shimmering green triage tent manifests over a parking lot. An intricate latticework of support beams shoots out to brace a hospital wing. When a creature of pure, chaotic energy, a screaming, ever-shifting monstrosity born from the rift's pain, bursts forth. Lantern does not blast it. He envelops it in a layered, spherical construct, a labyrinth of containment fields and dampeners, even as he uses another construct to divert a surge of plasma away from a group of firefighters. They work in a terrifying, perfect silence. No battle cries, no grand pronouncements, no debates. Just the relentless, efficient, and profoundly coordinated machinery of salvation. It is a symphony conducted without a glance, each knowing their part, their power complementing the others, covering gaps, amplifying strengths. A GDA surveillance drone, its shielding barely holding, captures a close-up image that will later break the internet and Cecil's worldview. Superman, crouched in the dust, his cape a tattered banner. He cradles a sobbing girl, no more than 5 in one arm. With his other hand, he points 2 fingers at a steel beam pinning a man's leg. The man is conscious, terrified. Superman's heat vision, a power the GDA has only ever seen used by Viltrumites to slice through battleships, emerges not as a violent blast, but as a hair-thin, precise beam of crimson light. He uses it as a scalpel, cauterizing the stump of the man's leg with millimetric accuracy, simultaneously fusing severed arteries and sterilizing the wound. The man lives. Superman's face, turned partially to the drone, is etched with a profound personal sorrow, as if each life here is a thread pulled from his own soul. Cecil Stedman stares, his finger now frozen an inch from the nuclear confirmation key. The equation in his mind, so clean a moment ago, is now a scribbled mess. "Who the hell are they?" he whispers, not to his analysts, but to the empty, logical air of the Eyrie. His entire philosophy, the bedrock of his life's work, built on acceptable losses, on preemptive strikes, on the dirty, necessary calculus of a world too weak to face its monsters head-on. Fractures like the glass over a red alert button. They possess power that rivals, perhaps exceeds, a Viltrumite's. And they are using it for triage, for carrying buses, for crying over children. The crisis peaks. The rift, pulsed by some deep dimensional heartbeat, throbs and expands violently. Seismographs worldwide spike. It is no longer just eating Chicago. It is threatening to burrow, to destabilize the planetary mantle, to unzip the Earth itself. The nuclear option is the only option left. The system beeps a 10-second countdown to automatic firing. "Sir," an analyst shouts. Then a new presence, a figure of solid, serene Martian green phases directly into the epicenter of the screaming colors, unaffected by the disintegrating laws. Martian Manhunter, John Johns, stands within the heart of the wound. He does not raise his fists. He does not project force. He closes his eyes, extends his hands, and opens his mind. He does not force the rift closed. He communicates. A psychic song felt by every telepath on the planet as a sudden, stunning chord of tranquility radiates outward. It is a song of soothing, of dimensional harmony, of reminding the torn fabric of space-time of what it is to be whole. It is not an attack. It is a lullaby for a screaming infant universe. The rift, a raw, confused wound, responds to this profound empathy. Its chaotic fluctuations begin to slow, to synchronize. The screaming colors soften, blend, and begin to fold in on themselves, not with a bang, but with a sigh. The singularity, gently persuaded, reverses its expansion. The wound in reality slowly, carefully knits itself shut, not with force, but with understanding. The silence that follows is deafening. The constant low hum of the Ares system seems obscenely loud. The crater, now a permanent 5-mile wide scar of polished stone, steams gently in the dawn light. The immediate threat is gone. The Justice League stands amid the ruin, dust, and the strange, non-reflective ash of erased matter settling on their shoulders like grimy snow. They are unbloodied. They have killed no one. Not a single casualty was caused by their intervention. Not even the energy-born creatures from the rift were slain. They remain contained in Lantern's slowly rotating constructs, already being scanned by Batman's portable devices. A squad of GDA rapid response troops, clad in powered armor and armed with plasma rifles designed to stagger a Viltrumite, approaches on jump jets. Their orders, direct from a protocol Cecil hasn't yet countermanded, are to detain all unknown superpowered entities. They land in a semicircle, weapons raised, targeting lasers painting hearts and foreheads. The air crackles with tension. Superman looks at the glowing muzzles of their weapons. Then he looks past the armor, at the faces of the young men and women behind the polarized visors, their eyes wide with terror, with awe, with confusion. He slowly raises his empty hands, palms open and forward, a universal gesture of peace that feels ancient in this cynical age. "We're here to help," he says. His voice is calm, clear, and carries an impossible weight of sincerity. It is not a challenge, not a demand, not a negotiation. It is a simple, declarative statement of fact. The sheer, unvarnished truth of it hangs in the charged air. A foreign artifact in this world of compromises and hidden agendas, as solid and undeniable as the Man of Steel himself. The GDA squad leader's finger hesitates on the trigger. The moment stretches, fragile. On the dark side of the moon, in an austere chamber carved from the rock by his own hands, a figure stirs from deep meditation. Nolan Grayson, Omni-Man, feels it. Not the physical tremor, but the psychic aftershock of the Martian's song. A telepathic signature of immense power and disquieting benevolence. His Viltrumite senses, attuned to the subtle energies of the cosmos, also feel the raw, untamed, solar-fueled power of the Kryptonian, a sun engine walking the Earth, its potential both terrifying and exhilarating. For 50 years, Nolan has been the apex predator of this globe, the strongest, the fastest, the most durable. His shadow has been the ceiling of what power means on Earth. He has shaped its conflicts, subtly guided its fears, and patiently, meticulously prepared it for its inevitable destiny as part of the Viltrumite Empire. The threats he has dealt with, the Flaxans, the Sequids, even the Guardians, were insects, momentarily irritating. This is different. He opens his eyes, their usual imperious coolness now flickering with something alien, sharp, analytical curiosity edged with the first tinge of territorial alarm. He senses other predators in his territory. Their power signatures are not hidden, they blaze like beacons. But the scent of them, the psychic and emotional resonance, confuses his warrior's soul. They do not smell like conquerors. They do not radiate the clean, focused ambition of Viltrum, the drive to dominate and order. They smell like protectors, like shepherds. It is a weak, sentimental concept, one the Viltrumite genome has bred out over millennia. It angers him. It complicates everything. He stands, his red cape billowing silently in the vacuum. He steps to the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, a statue of imperial contemplation. His eyes, hard as asteroid rock, fix on the blue-green marble of Earth, now marred by a tiny, shiny scar on the continent called America. A new variable has entered the equation, a variable powerful enough to resist, to inspire hope, to complicate the simple, glorious truth of Viltrum's manifest destiny. The first rule of Viltrumite conquest, the lesson hammered into him from his first breath in the academy, echoes in his mind cold and clear. Eliminate complications. A slow, deliberate smile touches his lips. It is not a pleasant expression. It is the smile of a master chess player who has just seen a surprising, powerful new piece placed on the board. The game has just become interesting. He turns from the viewport. The planning begins now, the assessment, the testing. Earth's would-be guardians have arrived. Let them see what true guardianship requires in a universe without mercy. The Justice League Watchtower, a spectral moonbase of Kryptonian alloy and Thanagarian stealth tech, hung in the silent black like a poised dagger. Anchored in geosynchronous orbit over a wary Earth, it was both a sanctuary and a statement, a declaration that protection did not require occupation. Below, the narrative splintered across a globe, grappling with the seismic shock of their arrival. In capitals and slums, in bunkers and newsrooms, humanity was forced to confront an uncomfortable question. What does safety cost, and who gets to set the price? I, the auditor and the spy master. The Global Defense Agency's primary command bunker, buried deep beneath the New Mexican desert, was a temple to pragmatic dread. Here, in a sterile briefing room lit by the cold glow of holographic displays, Cecil Stedman faced a shadow that had slipped through his most paranoid defenses. Batman sat as still as the granite earth above them. He had arrived not with a demand, but with a digital key. A virus woven from alien code and human ingenuity slipped into the GDA's mainframe not to cripple, but to bear witness. On the split-screen display before him, years of classified history played out in brutal high definition. Cecil lit a cigarette, the flare of the match the only warm light in the room. You broke into the most secure facility on the planet to watch our home movies? To understand the context of the invitation, Batman replied, his voice a low rumble that seemed to absorb sound rather than create it. His eyes never left the screens. The footage was a curated descent into hell. The Mahler twins, their crude cloning tech unleashing anarchic violence in downtown Detroit, ended not with an arrest, but with a smoking crater where a city block had been, a containment burn authorized by Cecil. The Flaxen invasion, a silvery green tide of insectoid soldiers overwhelming Houston, met with a response of such disproportionate force that the tectonic plates of the Gulf Coast still registered the aftershocks. The battlefields were littered with civilian cars, shattered homes, the incidental confetti of a war fought without a rear line. Then came the centerpiece, the brutal public execution of the Guardians of the Globe. Batman watched the grainy, satellite-enhanced footage of Omni-Man moving with the terrible, efficient grace of a butcher in an abattoir. Red Rush disintegrated into a crimson mist. Darkwing was snapped like a dry twig. The Immortal the Immortal was pummeled into a red paste against the mountain rock, again and again, until not even his legendary healing factor could reassemble the will to live. Batman's expression remained a frozen lake, but the human tells were there, microcurrents beneath the ice. A slight tightening at the corner of his jaw, a minute flaring of his nostrils as he inhaled the sterile, recycled air. His fingers, resting on the polished black tabletop, slowly curled inward until the knuckles were pale stones under the leather of his gloves. The final clip was audio only, declassified from Cecil's personal log after the Battle of Chicago. Omni-Man's voice, chillingly reasonable. Cecil, the Chicago casualty projections are within acceptable parameters for a Viltrumite stabilization operation. The infrastructure can be rebuilt. The species will be secured. And Cecil's own weary reply, "Just get it done, Nolan. Contain the damage." The screens went dark, reflecting Batman's impassive cowl back at him. "You categorize civilian casualties as collateral dampening," Batman stated. It wasn't a question. "A calculated metric. You observed, you quantified, and you sanctioned Omni-Man's methods in exchange for planetary security. A transaction. You built your entire defense strategy around a being you knew, on some level, was a predator." Cecil took a long drag, the smoke curling around his grizzled face like fog around a craggy headland. "We survive," he retorted, the words ash dry. "That's the only absolute that matters in this universe. You operate in a world of grays so dark they're almost black, Bruce. Don't pretend otherwise. I've read your file. The Joker's body count. The prisons you fill that empty out by noon. Omni-Man was a necessary evil. He kept the wolves from the door." Batman stood, his cape falling into a motionless curtain behind him. In the confined space, he seemed to grow, not in size, but in density, a vortex of withheld judgment. "The moment you willingly call evil necessary," he said, each word measured and cold, "you cease to be its manager. You become its architect. You pour the foundation. You raise the walls. You make it a permanent fixture in the moral landscape. Gotham's darkness is a disease I fight every night. You institutionalized yours. You gave it a badge and a budget." He turned toward the door, which hissed open at his approach. Before exiting, he paused, delivering his final audit. "The Justice League is not a necessary evil, Cecil. We are an unnecessary good. And that is a far more dangerous thing for men like you to comprehend." The door shut, leaving Cecil alone with the ghost of his own compromises, staring at the blank screens where his sins had just been played back for him. 2. The Stranger in a Scarred City. Metropolis was a city of light, but not his light. To Superman, walking its broad avenues, it felt like a mirror universe reflection of his home, familiar in its soaring Art Deco spires and bustling optimism, but fundamentally, tragically alien. This was a city that had been loved by a tyrant. The affection was a brand, not an embrace. He walked without his cape, in the simple, anachronistic disguise of Clark Kent's clothes. He wanted to listen, not to be approached, and he heard everything. His Kryptonian hearing, usually a symphony he could gently tune down to a background hum, was here a raw, open wound. In the gleaming star. Lab's trauma ward, a young girl wept softly for a father incinerated in the Chicago plasma storm. her mother's whispered comforts, doing nothing to dam the tide of grief. In a nearby apartment, a couple argued in hissed tones, the husband insisting they should have accepted the Viltrumite peace, the wife calling him a coward. The media chatter was a discordant drumbeat of fear and fragile hope. On a giant public screen, a polished cable news host named Cameron Ferguson snarled to his panel, "They refuse to submit to GDA authority. They operate from a secret fortress in space. Who elected them? What checks exist on their power?" A retired general nodded sagely. "Unvetted cosmic hazards," he intoned. But cutting through the fear was a raw, defiant chord. On a sidewalk interview, a woman named Maria, her arm in a sling from a Chicago building collapse, faced the camera with tear-bright, furious eyes. "They held my hand while the world ended," she shouted, her voice cracking with passion. "They dug through 3 floors of rubble because they heard my baby crying. They didn't ask for my vote. They didn't ask for my surrender. They just saved me. So you can take your authority and your vetting and you can shove it." Superman felt a lump form in his throat. This was the schism, the tear in the world's soul. The League offered a paradigm shift so radical it was terrifying in its simplicity. Power that served, that healed, that asked for nothing in return. It was a glimpse of a different way, and its sheer, uncompromising kindness was a threat to every system built on control and fear. His journey ended at the monument. It stood in what was once the Guardians' headquarters plaza, a stark, brutalist slab of black granite, devoid of ornament. No statues, no flowing tributes, just 8 names, laser-etched into the stone, and a single devastating date marking their annihilation. It was a monument not to glory, but to absence. To a loss so total it had been normalized, made a foundational fact of this Earth's history. Superman approached, the noise of the city fading into a respectful hush in his mind. He reached out and placed his palm flat against the stone. It was cold, sucking the warmth from his skin. He felt the minute imperfections in the granite, the ghost echo of tools that had shaped it. And he felt the weight. The normalized, accepted scale of loss here was a gravitational force his own heart, for all its Kryptonian strength, struggled to lift. On his Earth, the death of even one hero was a universe-altering tragedy. Here, the death of an entire pantheon was a line item in a security brief. He bowed his head, not in prayer, but in a silent promise to the echoes in the stone. It won't be normal anymore. 3. The Warrior and the Heir. Wonder Woman found him on a rooftop overlooking the Bay Area, where the Guardians' old headquarters had once stood. He was just a silhouette against the setting sun, young, his shoulders set with a tension that was equal parts immense power and profound, world-shattering confusion. "Mark Grayson," she said, her voice calm, carrying over the wind. Invincible turned, his white eyes wide in the cowl. He looked so young, younger than Robin. "Wonder Woman," he said, the name tinged with awe and wariness. I saw you in Chicago. You moved like my dad, but different." "We are not here to replace your father, Mark," Diana said, joining him at the ledge. She didn't hover, didn't stand with warrior rigidity. She simply stood beside him, a fellow guardian looking out at the world they were bound to protect. "I know that," Mark said quickly, defensively. He's complicated. The things they're saying, he's saved this world 1,000 times over, from things you can't even imagine." "I have imagined many things," Diana replied, her gaze distant, seeing shores beyond this universe. "I have walked in the underworld and battled gods of war. Saving a world is a noble act, but it is the how and the why that define a hero, not the mere fact of it. Mark scowled, looking out at the city lights beginning to flicker on. The why is to keep people safe. That's what he did. That's what he taught me to do. And how many times, Diana asked, her tone not unkind, but inexorably direct, like a river cutting through stone, has he, in the process of keeping them safe, demanded their obedience? How many times has protection slipped into dominion? There is a line, Mark. It is thin, and it is often blurred by fear and good intentions, but it is real. A true guardian stands with the people behind that line. They do not stand over them, having erased it. Mark's fists clenched at his sides. You don't know him? He's my dad. He loves my mom. He taught me how to fly. The last sentence was almost a plea. Diana's expression softened with a compassion forged over millennia. I believe he loves you in his way, and I believe that makes his betrayal of your ideals all the more painful. But love is not an excuse for empire. She turned to face him fully. I am Diana of Themyscira, daughter of Hippolyta. My people were created to guide humanity away from the path of conquest, of Ares's influence. I know the language of empire, Mark. I've heard it sung in the halls of Olympus and whispered in the war councils of man. It is the same in any universe. It always begins with, for your own good. Mark looked away, his jaw working. The defensiveness was crumbling, leaving behind the raw, confused boy underneath. What am I supposed to do? The question was small, lost in the vastness of the sky. You learn, Diana said. You choose. You define your own line, and you hold to it, even when, especially when, the one who taught you to stand tries to convince you to cross it. 4. The public schism. The fracture was no longer contained to briefing rooms and rooftops. It erupted into the living rooms of the world, a live fire debate over the soul of heroism. On the global news network GBN, the debate raged. Cameron Ferguson, his face a mask of scorn, framed the split screen. On one side, the GDA's new press secretary, a stern woman citing jurisdictional integrity and accountability frameworks. On the other, a community organizer from Chicago, a pastor, and the survivor, Maria. They are a sovereign entity operating with impunity, the press secretary insisted. They are a sanctuary, the pastor boomed. They ask for no tithes, demand no fealty. They offer shelter from the storm. Since when is that a crime? Shelter, Ferguson sneered, or a gilded cage? A prettier version of the Viltrumite yoke? Maria leaned into her microphone, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a righteous, clearing fury. You keep talking about yokes and cages. I was under 3 floors of concrete. I couldn't move. The air was dust. That was a cage. Then a light came through. It was the Flash. He didn't ask if I was pro-League or pro-GDA. He saw I was trapped, and he vibrated a tunnel through solid rock so gently my baby didn't even wake up. That is the difference. One side sees problems to control. The other sees people to save. You're terrified of them because you can't understand which category you fall into for them. The clip went viral. It became a rallying cry and a target. Protests sprouted outside the GDA's public offices, some demanding the League submit, others demanding the GDA stand down. The world was polarized, not along national lines, but along the fundamental axis of hope versus fear. The League had become a living question, and every human being was being forced to answer. B. The Conference of Gods. The confrontation did not come in a blaze of celestial glory, amid thunder and shattered mountains. It arrived in the cold, soundless quiet of the watchtower's main observation deck. Here, one could see the Earth not as a map, but as a being, a swirling, breathing jewel of blue and white and green, wrapped in a thin, precious veil of atmosphere. Superman floated alone, bathed in its reflected light, studying the continents. He saw the scar of the American Midwest where Chicago had been scarred. He saw the dust storms over the Sahara, the typhoons spinning in the Pacific. A world of breathtaking beauty and profound fragility. A world he was sworn to protect, but which, in this reality, he could not fully comprehend. A tremor passed through the deck. Not a shake, but a subtle harmonic distortion in the very fabric of the space station's energy field. A red streak trailing not fire but warped light impacted the transparent molybdenum quartz alloy behind him with a sound like a dying star being stifled. The window, designed to withstand direct meteor impacts, didn't crack. It groaned, a deep basso profundo protest transmitted through the frame. No klaxons sounded, no shield alarms. The Watchtower's sophisticated threat response systems, a blend of Kryptonian, Martian, and Earth tech, had been bypassed not with subtle code, but with effortless, violent precision. A Viltrumite brute force override of atomic bonds and electromagnetic fields. Superman did not turn. His hands remained clasped behind his back. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said, his voice calm, carrying easily in the sterile air. Omni-Man floated just outside the window in the hard vacuum, his arms crossed over his barrel chest. The stars were blotted out by his silhouette, making him a cutout of pure, menacing substance against the cosmos. He wasn't snarling, wasn't posturing. He was assessing, like a geologist considering a new and curious stratum of rock. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the watchtower's interior, its technology, the singular being at its heart. "You have power," Nolan stated. His voice, even filtered through the hull and atmosphere, was like the sound of continental plates grinding against one another, immense, slow, and freighted with inevitable force. Real power. I can feel it from here, a different flavor than a Viltrumite's, but substantial. Yet you play at being servants. You build your nest among them. You ask permission from insects. Superman finally turned. He moved slowly, deliberately, until he faced the window and the God-Killer beyond it. His face was the placid mask of Clark Kent, but his eyes had changed. They were no longer the warm blue of a Kansas sky. They were the hard, compressed blue of Earth's superheated core, immense pressure contained by infinite will. "We lead by example," Superman said, his voice quiet but absolute, a fundamental law spoken aloud. "Not by force. We ask for trust, not permission. There is a difference." Nolan's lip curled into a hint of a smile. It was devoid of any human warmth, the expression of a mathematician who has just discovered an elegant, fatal flaw in a beloved theorem. A charming fairy tale, one I might have found quaint centuries ago. He drifted closer until his face was mere inches from the other side of the transparent wall. "I've studied your world's history, its thrilling, pathetic chaos, its endless, cyclical parade of war, genocide, and self-inflicted suffering. You cure a plague, they invent a new one. You stop a tyrant, 3 more sprout from the blood-soaked soil. Your example is a band-aid on a gut wound. You treat symptoms and call it virtue." He placed a palm flat against the window. The alloy shuddered. "We offer the cure, not a treatment, a permanent end to the disease, submission, order, a unified purpose, a universe without conflict, without waste, without the endless screaming friction of individual will. Superman matched his gaze evenly, unblinking. A universe without choice, he countered, floating forward until only the thickness of the hull separated them. Without love that is freely given, without art born from struggle, without justice that is earned, not imposed. You don't end conflict, Nolan. You just kill everyone who disagrees with you. You don't create peace. You create a graveyard so vast and silent you mistake it for tranquility. Nolan's mocking smile faded, replaced by a look of cold, clinical disappointment. And in doing so, he said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that vibrated through the deck plating, I save billions more, across millennia, from their own pathetic, self-destructive natures. I save them from the pain of their choices. You are a gardener, Superman, who stands weeping over every weed, refusing to prune the rot for fear of hurting the plant. And you call your sentimentality strength. You call your inaction virtue. The air between them, even through the barrier, began to crackle with static. The ambient temperature in the observation deck dropped sharply. Frost spiderwebbed out from the point of Nolan's touch on the window. The two most powerful beings on or near the planet faced each other. Their philosophies as irreconcilable as matter and antimatter. This isn't a debate, is it? Superman asked softly. He already knew the answer. He was giving the father one last chance to see the son's path. No, Omni-Man replied, his eyes hardening into gemstones of pure resolve. He drew his fist back. The watchtower's gravity generators whined in protest as space itself warped around his gathering strength. It's a lesson. The molybdenum quartz window, the pride of Wayne tech and Kryptonian science, did not shatter into a million pieces. It vaporized. The final lesson is not taught amidst the stars, in the cold vacuum where a Viltrumite feels most at home. It is taught on Earth over the dense, frozen emptiness of Antarctica. A chosen theater, stark and impersonal. Nolan leads Superman there, a deliberate courtesy to minimize human collateral. A Viltrumite's chilling version of consideration. The howling wind is the only mourner present for what he intends to be a swift, instructive execution of an outdated ideal. You see this? Nolan's voice cuts through the sub-zero gale, his arm sweeping across the endless, pristine white. This is peace, predictable, ordered, silent, contained. Viltrumite expansion brings this peace to screaming, chaotic worlds. We are not monsters, Cal. We are surgeons. We are physicians. We remove the cancer of disorder, of wasted potential, of endless squabbling decline. We offer a universal cure. Superman stands firm on the ice, his red cape a solitary splash of color against the monochrome void, barely stirring in the bitter wind. His breath doesn't fog. The cold is nothing to him. But the chill in Nolan's words reaches him. Peace isn't the absence of noise, Nolan. It's not sterile silence. It's the presence of justice, of safety earned through compassion, not imposed through terror. It's the hum of a community, the freedom to grow, to make mistakes, to live. You're not creating peace. You're conducting a slow, mass funeral for an entire culture's future. You're not a physician. You're an embalmer. Nolan's expression, a mask of paternal disappointment, hardens. The patience, always a thin veneer over bedrock conviction, evaporates. You cling to sentiment like a child to a blanket. It blinds you to cosmic reality. The first punch is not a blur of motion. It is a teleportation of force, a negation of the space between them. The sound barrier doesn't break. It shatters in a continent-wide thunderclap that echoes off the polar plateau. The air itself crystallizes in the shockwave. Superman crosses his arms, taking the blow on his forearms. The impact doesn't just echo, it translates downward. A spider web of fissures 10 miles across explodes across the ice sheet beneath their feet, a stark white scar on the planet's face. The ground groans a protest older than humanity. Thus begins a terrifying dialogue written in kinetic energy. Nolan is the author, aggressive and eloquent. Superman is the editor, defensive, parrying, trying to insert footnotes of reason into a text of pure violence. Nolan moves with the brutal efficiency of a predator, every motion engineered for maximum damage. He fights with the clean, horrific geometry of a natural disaster. Superman holds back. He absorbs shattering blows that would vaporize mountains, a hook to the jaw that snaps his head back with a crack heard for miles, a driving knee to the solar plexus that forces the air from his lungs in a visible plume. He skids across the ice, carving canyons, always righting himself, his eyes never leaving Nolan's. "Your son believes in you!" Superman shouts, the words carrying over the roar of collapsing ice shelves. Mark sees the ghost of a good man in you, the man who raised him, who taught him right from wrong, who loved Debbie. That man was real. He's in there fighting your programming. That man was a tool, Nolan roars, a sound of pure, unfiltered fury. He closes the distance in a microsecond, driving a fist like a piston into Superman's ribs. The impact detonates with the force of a tectonic plate shifting. Superman is launched, skidding across the ice like a skipped stone, each bounce triggering localized blizzards from displaced snow and energy. A pleasant fiction, a mask worn for a mission. The truth is written in blood and strength. It is the only language the universe respects. Meanwhile, in the Watchtower, the silent panic is louder than any alarm. The Justice League watches the satellite and mystical feeds, a tableau of horror rendered in sensor data and shaky long-range images. The monitor wall is a storm of crimson alerts. Flash vibrates in place, a blur of frustrated energy. I can't even parse their movements. It's like watching two galaxies collide in fast forward. Green Lantern's construct, a detailed topographic map of Antarctica, flickers with each impact. Energy readings are off the scale. He's not just strong, he's efficient. No wasted motion. It's like watching a master sculptor work, if the marble was reality itself. Wonder Woman's hand is on the hilt of her sword, her jaw set. He fights with the heart of a conqueror. Clark fights with the heart of a protector. They are speaking different languages with their fists. Batman is a statue before the main console, fingers flying over holographic keys. He isolates thermal signatures, analyzes shockwave propagation, studies Nolan's stance microsecond by microsecond. His voice is a gravelly whisper, more to himself than the others. He's not just fighting to win, he's demonstrating a live dissection of Clark's ethos. Every time Clark positions himself to absorb a blast aimed at a distant mountain, every time he turns his body to shield a penguin rookery from a shockwave, Nolan sees it. He's cataloging the inefficiency of restraint. He's proving his theorem that care is a tactical flaw. On the ground, the cataclysm finds a witness. Invincible arrives, a green and blue streak drawn by the seismic and sonic cataclysm registering on every satellite on the planet. He sees it. His father, not the weary, conflicted man from the kitchen, but a god of wrath, an avatar of the Empire's might. Nolan moves with a chilling, beautiful precision, each blow a statement of absolute power. And he sees Superman, the S-shield now smeared with frost and a shocking dash of crimson from a split lip, weathering the storm. He sees the Kryptonian not just block, but redirect. He takes a world-shattering punch squarely, not to counter, but to ensure the backblast dissipates harmlessly into the upper atmosphere. He uses his own body as a buffer between Nolan's fury and a cluster of distant, glowing dots on the horizon, the scientific outposts. Stop! Mark's scream is a raw, teenage plea torn from his soul. He throws himself into the no man's land between the titans, arms spread, his own insignia feeling absurdly small. The wind whips his hair, tears freezing on his cheeks. Nathaniel freezes, his fist coiled to deliver a hammer blow to Superman's exposed back, halted mere feet from his son's face. The momentum of it sends a gust of air that nearly knocks Mark from the sky. For a nanosecond, Superman sees it. Not doubt in Nolan's eyes, but a flicker of profound, exasperated irritation, an emotional variable, a miscalculation. The tool's attachment interfering with the mission. Mark! Nolan's voice is dangerously calm, the calm of a volcano suppressing its eruption. Step aside. This is not your fight. This is what true responsibility looks like. This is the unflinching exercise of power for a greater order. This is the burden you sentimentalists refuse to grasp. You're wrong, Dad. Mark's voice trembles, but his body holds its position, a fragile shield. Can't you see it? He's holding back. He's been holding back this whole time. For them. He jabs a finger toward the tiny, brave pinpricks of light on the horizon, humanity clinging to the ice. Superman slowly rises from his defensive crouch, wiping a smear of blood, red as his cape, from his chin. The ice beneath him is stained with it. He stands tall, and in that moment, he seems to tower not physically, but morally. He's right, Nolan. You call this strength? True strength isn't the freedom to destroy. It's the power to prevent destruction, even at your own expense. You're so afraid of chaos, you've become its most efficient, most terrifying agent. You don't build order, you impose a tomb. The words hit Nolan not as an insult, but as a heresy. A dangerous, infectious heresy that could corrupt his son. Enraged, he shifts tactics. The lesson must be made undeniable. He doesn't attack Superman again. He turns his back contemptuously to the Kryptonian and looks toward the largest outpost, a geodesic dome housing 40 researchers. With a calculated, almost graceful flick of his wrists, he brings his hands together in a hypersonic clap. It is not aimed at Superman. It is a focused beam of concussive annihilation, a wall of compressed air moving at Mach 50, designed to vaporize the dome and everyone in it. A deliberate, pedagogical atrocity. Final proof that caring forces you into a losing position. That mercy is a fatal hesitation. Superman moves. He is not faster than the sound. He is there before the physics can fully manifest. He places himself between the outpost and the oncoming wave of death, his back to Nolan, his arms spread wide as if to embrace the blow. There is no time for a clever defense, only interposition. The force, meant to scour a mile of ice, concusses against the symbol of hope on his back. A sound like the end of the world crumples around him. The shockwave, contained and reflected by his body, ripples outwards in a secondary, less lethal ring. Superman is driven to his knees, a crater of molten ice forming around him. His cape is shredded at the edges. He grunts, a sound of immense strain, as the energy bleeds through him and into the ground, causing a localized quake. The outpost behind him shudders, windows cracking, but it stands. The people inside, thrown to the floor, are alive. Slowly, Superman looks up. His hair is matted with ice and more of his own blood. But his eyes, they blaze with a fire that is not rage, not hatred. It is an absolute, unyielding conviction, a light that refuses to be extinguished by the surrounding void. See? Nolan spits the word, floating above him like a vengeful angel. He gestures at Superman's kneeling form. There, you kneel to save them. You make yourself small, a sacrifice to their weakness. You trade strategic superiority for a fleeting moral victory. This pathetic spectacle is why you will lose every time. The air is frozen, heavy with the aftermath. Mark is sobbing openly, paralyzed by the horrifying clarity of his father's philosophy. It is then that Omni-Man, perhaps to finally shatter this infuriating, resilient ideal, to excise the sentiment threatening his son and his mission, reveals the core truth. Not in the manner of a gloating villain's monologue, but as a statement of cold galactic fact. A pronouncement as irrevocable as a tombstone being set. Your resistance is a footnote, Kal-El, Nolan says, his voice dropping, losing its heated edge for something far more terrifying, pure, unemotional reportage. This world is not for saving, it is for harvesting. My presence here was never about conquest in the crude sense. It was cultivation. He lands softly on the ice, pacing slowly, a lecturer delivering the final grim syllabus. In 5 Earth years, a Viltrumite purification fleet will enter this system. Its arrival is inevitable. My reports have already been sent. When they come, the strong of this world, the metahumans, the exceptional humans, those with the genetic potential to bear the Viltrumite mark, will be assessed. The worthy will be conscripted. Their potential, currently squandered on your petty justice, will be honed, purified, and put to service in the greatest empire this universe has ever known. He stops, looking directly at Mark, then at Superman. The rest, the vast, chaotic, weeping mass of humanity, will be removed, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. A field must be cleared of weeds for the chosen crop to thrive. What I have done here, the peace I have enforced, the destabilization of your primitive power structures, is the preliminary conditioning. It softens the soil. Your defiance today? It is a data point, proof that this world requires the fleet's more direct attentions. He turns his gaze fully to Superman, and for the first time there might be a sliver of something akin to pity in his eyes. You are not defending a people. You are delaying the inevitable upgrade of their species. You are fighting to preserve a disease because you are sentimentally attached to its symptoms. The words hang in the frozen air, heavier than the continent itself. They don't just describe an invasion, they describe an apotheosis, a genocide reframed as evolutionary hygiene. Mark's face goes blank, all color draining away, replaced by the horror of understanding that his father is not just a conqueror, but a herald, a farmer preparing the harvest. Superman's eyes widen, not in fear for himself, but in a profound, galaxy-deep grief. a sorrow for the billions of lives whose future has just been neatly, logically sentenced, for the beautiful, chaotic, wonderful experiment of human freedom that is slated for termination. He sees the full scope of the Viltrumite cancer, and it is not mindless brutality. It is a rational, self-replicating ideology of perfection that sees love as a defect and diversity as a flaw. The battle on the ice, with its shattered continents and spilled blood, was merely physical. The war, the true, terrible, desperate war, is now finally and irrevocably ideological. And the fate of two universes hangs on which ideal proves stronger: the compassion that embraces chaos or the order that annihilates it. The Viltrumite response is not a single attack. It is a systemic pressure test designed not just to break bones, but to break the League's philosophy at its seams, to turn their greatest strengths into fatal liabilities. Nolan's report has been received, analyzed, and deemed a valuable data point on the pestilence of heroism. The three scouts dispatched are not warriors in the romantic sense. They are auditors, cold functionaries of the Viltrumite imperative. Thrag of the methodical mind, Kregor of the brutal hand, and Valis of the clinical eye. Their mandate is clear: stress test the new assets, collect behavioral data, and cull the weak. The war, therefore, unfolds not on one battlefield, but on three distinct fronts: a brutal symphony of impossible choices orchestrated to prove a universal theorem, that compassion is inefficiency, that morality is a strategic flaw. Front 1, Coast City. The logic of exhaustion. The scout, Thrag, descends not with a war cry, but with the silent disinterest of a technician. He bypasses the military cordons, the news helicopters, the shining emblem of the Justice League. His first target is unglamorous: the Robert A. Heinlein fusion power plant. He doesn't smash it. He applies precise vibrational taps to critical support junctions, learned from a millennia of planetary pacifications. The plant goes dark, then enters a cascading failure sequence. 15 seconds later, the secondary grid overloads. 30 seconds after that, the water purification mains, dependent on that power, shudder and cease. His goal is not murder. It is mass panic, a tide of human suffering so vast it becomes a mathematical certainty. He is testing a variable. Will the protector prioritize stopping the source of the problem or mitigating its effects? Hal Jordan, a torrent of emerald will, arrives as the first hospital generators fail. He sees Thrag hovering above the cityscape, watching. Hal's instinct is a giant construct fist. Thrag evades without looking, pointing instead to the downtown hospital's neonatal wing, where ventilators are sputtering. Your choice, Green Lantern. Thrag's voice is flat, transmitted through a forced comms link. Aggression or compassion, let us measure which is more costly. Hal snarls, but he diverts. His will becomes substance. A sprawling, intricate network of glowing green respirators, IV drips, and backup generators, each requiring a sliver of his monumental concentration. He is a one-man infrastructure. While he holds 1,000 lives in his mind's grasp, Thrag moves to the harbor, using his heat vision to superheat a section of water, creating a localized steam explosion that ruptures a major aqueduct. A geyser erupts, flooding the financial district. The taunt comes again. You see the loop? I create entropy. You expend energy to create temporary order. Your compassion is not a shield. It is a fuel pump, and I am the engine. A perfectly efficient cycle of your own depletion. Hal's ring flashes warnings. Willpower reserves at 78%. Concentration fractalization detected. He is fighting a battle of thermodynamics against a being who understands that societal collapse is a greater weapon than any plasma beam. He creates aqueducts of light, bridges of solidified will, filtration plants of intricate construct mesh. Each disaster averted is a victory that feels like a defeat, a draining of his spirit as Thrag, untouched, calculates the next most efficient point of systemic failure. Front 2, the Amazon, the calculus of decency. For Wonder Woman, the war becomes a personal damnation. The scout, Krigor, possesses none of Thrag's cold analysis. His is a more visceral experiment. He understands strength, honor, and rules of engagement. He sees them as the ultimate vulnerability. He doesn't attack her, he attacks the world around her. Using his speed and precision, he identifies geological fault lines beneath remote Yanomami villages, striking them with concussive claps that trigger catastrophic landslides. He shears the side off a mountain, directing a river of mud and stone towards a school. Diana, a golden streak, faces the vilest choice: engage the enemy directly or save the innocent. There is no choice for her. Every time she chooses the people. She intercepts the landslide, her muscles corded, her boots digging trenches in the earth as she holds back millions of tons of rock. It is then that Krigor strikes, a hammer blow from the sun-dappled sky, catching her as she strains under the physical and moral weight. The impact cracks the Amazonian bedrock. Diana rises from the crater, her armor dented, a hairline fracture splitting her tiara. Blood, the blood of a goddess, tracks from her lip. Krigor lands before her, not even breathing heavily. In one hand, he holds a tribesman, an elder who had been trying to help evacuate the children. "You fight with rules," Krigor scoffs, his voice like grinding stone. "You will not strike a helpless foe. You will not abandon a civilian. You must defend the weak." He looks at the elder's terrified face, then back at Diana. "These are not principles. They are chains. The shackles the weak place upon the strong to hinder them." Before Diana can move, he applies pressure. The sound of the elder's wrist bones snapping is obscenely loud in the suddenly silent jungle. The man's scream is a knife in Diana's heart. Krigor watches her face, studies the rage, the horror, the crippling need to help warring with the need to punish. "Observe," Krigor says, dropping the moaning man. "Your decency has caused him more pain. Had you attacked me without hesitation, he might be whole. Your morality is not a virtue. It is a tool I wield against you. This," he gestures to the shattered forest, the crying children, the wounded elder, "is total war. It is a war on the very idea that your rules have any place in it." For the first time in her long life, Diana, daughter of Themyscira, champion of love and truth, understands the seductive abyss of pragmatism. To win, must she become like him? The question hangs in the air, more paralyzing than any blow. Front 3, the Watchtower. The algebra of fear. In the cold, silent vacuum, the third front is the most intimate. Scout Valis does not throw a single punch. He invades the Watchtower's systems with a quiet, unstoppable prowess that makes even Batman's most paranoid firewalls seem like child's play. He is not there to destroy. He is there to research, to profile, to find the breaking point not of the body, but of the soul. Batman and Martian Manhunter are his subjects. Valis bypasses all weaponry, all life support. He goes straight to the historical databases, the mission logs, the after-action reports. He compiles a list. On every screen across the Watchtower, then across every television, smartphone, and monitor on the planet linked to a network. A slideshow begins. It starts with the faces of every person saved in Chicago during Omni-Man's attack. Heroes, firefighters, civilians. Then, with chilling efficiency, the display changes. It shows their families, their spouses at work, their children at school, their elderly parents at home. Names, addresses, daily routines. Vallis's voice, calm and didactic, fills the watchtower comms as John Johns, his form shimmering with effort, tries to mount a psychic counterassault, only to find Vallis's mind a fortress of disciplined, singular purpose. A catalog of vulnerabilities, Batman, Vallis explains. John staggers, a psychic feedback migraine spiking through his telepathic centers. The Chicago event was a useful baseline. You risked much for the many, a noble, if statistically foolish endeavor. But sentiment is not linear. It is exponential. The will to fight for a city may not scale to the will to fight for a single, specific life. Let us run the experiment. Let us find the exact threshold. What is the smallest unit of human life for which you will break your principled stand against lethal force? He highlights one image, a little girl, 7 years old, saved from a collapsing building by Superman. Her face fills the screen. Lena Thorell. A map appears, her school, her route home. If threatening a city does not bend you, perhaps threatening her will. In the heart of the watchtower, Batman works with cold fury, trying to sever the feeds, to scramble the data. But Vallis's code rewrites itself faster than he can delete it. It is a battle of intellect, and Batman is facing a 1,000-year-old consciousness for which strategy is a biological instinct. It is here, in a secondary command bunker deep beneath the desert, that Batman finds Cecil Stedman. The man is surrounded by schematics, not of Earth tech, but of scavenged, half-understood alien horrors. The central image is a planet cracker torpedo, a relic of a forgotten interstellar war rebuilt with trembling, desperate hands. It's the only language they understand. Cecil rasps, his eyes hollow sockets burned by lack of sleep and the glare of apocalyptic calculus. Negotiation? A show of force? They laugh at it. This, he points a shaking finger at the weapon. This is a verb, the only verb in their lexicon. It's genocide, Cecil, Batman says, his voice a low growl in the dim light. You're talking about activating a weapon that, by your own estimates, has a 40% chance of destabilizing Earth's core if deployed incorrectly. You're talking about becoming the monster to fight the monster. Cecil slams his fist onto the console, a sudden, shocking violence. It's survival, he screams, spittle flying. The raw, unfiltered terror in his voice is more chilling than any villain's rant. Don't you see? You brought this on us. You and your bright costumes and your unwavering hope. You painted a target on this entire planet. Your hope was a contagion, and we were all infected. Now the fever is burning us alive, and you're still preaching about the moral high ground while the house collapses. What good is your code when we're all dead? The confrontation is a microcosm of the war itself. Ideal against pragmatism, the future against the now, the soul of a world hanging in the balance. The breaking point, Coast City. The final equation. High above, Superman is held in agonizing reserve. Omni-Man, a grim sentinel, mirrors his every move. They hover in the stratosphere, two gods amid the clouds, watching the tripartite suffering below like observers of a grim, living tapestry. Watch, Kryptonian, Nolan says, his voice stripped of its earlier mocking confidence, replaced by a weary, almost instructive tone. Do not just see the flames, see the pattern. Thrag exhausts the willful one. Krigor corrupts the principled one. Valis terrifies the tactical one. Your league is a system. We are stress testing every subsystem to failure. Watch your ideals shatter under pragmatic pressure. This is not cruelty for its own sake. This is the universe's true curriculum. The strong endure by shedding weakness. This is the lesson. Superman's jaw is clenched so tight it could forge steel. He sees Hal's light flicker. He feels Diana's righteous fury turning to despair. He hears the silent scream of Batman's strategic mind being cornered, and he can do nothing. In Coast City, Thrag grows bored. Green Lantern's resilience, while admirable, is proving predictably linear. The data is collected. The experiment needs a terminal result. He abandons his systemic games. Below, a panicked crowd of thousands, fleeing the artificial floods and blackouts, is trapped on the twisting overpass of the interstate, which Thrag had previously weakened. With a sigh of finality, he plummets. Not as a missile aimed at Hal, but as a spear aimed at the densest part of the crowd, a control group extinction. Hal Jordan sees it. In that moment, he is not a pilot, not a space cop, not a man. He is will incarnate. He pours every ounce of his being, every memory of his father's strength, his brother's pride, Carol's love, into a single monumental construct. It is not a shield. It is a cathedral of green light, a vast crystalline dome of intricate geometric lattices, designed to absorb, deflect, and dissipate kinetic energy across its entire surface. It slams into place over the freeway section a millisecond before impact. The sound is not a crash, but a deep, resonant gong that shakes the city. The dome holds. The people beneath it scream, but they are alive. Hal floats, ring blazing like a miniature sun, veins standing out on his forehead. He's done it. Thrag, however, does not rebound. In a display of physics-defying control, he reverses his trajectory in midair with no loss of momentum. His path becomes a vicious, calculated zigzag. He is not striking randomly. He is analyzing the dome's emission signature, the minute stress fractures in the light lattice, the resonant frequency. His supercomputer mind processes it in nanoseconds. He identifies the single weakest quantum junction in Hal's creation. He strikes it, a pinpoint tap. The sound this time is of a million panes of glass shattering. The beautiful emerald cathedral explodes into a dissipating shower of green mist. And in that moment, as concrete and steel begin to rain down upon thousands, a new light appears. Not green, gold and crimson. The flash is there. Barry Allen doesn't try to hit Thrag. He knows he can't. He runs. He becomes a storm of salvation. He creates vortexes of wind to deflect chunks of debris the size of trucks. He vibrates his molecules to phase through solid matter, pulling children from crumpled cars before the metal can settle. He races up falling girders to pluck people from the air. He exists in 1,000 places at once, a blur of reassuring smiles and gentle hands amidst the chaos. He is not fighting a villain. He is fighting time, gravity, and death itself. But Thrag is not just strong. He is observant. fervent. He stops attacking. He simply watches, his head tilting, tracking the scarlet blur with analytical precision. He is learning the patterns, the subconscious tendencies, the tiny hesitations before a rescue. He is building a predictive model of the Flash's compassion. He sees Barry spot a single falling infant dropped from a shattered car window tumbling down the side of the overpass. The calculation in Thrag's mind is instantaneous, perfect, and horrifying. He knows the exact vector Barry will take. He knows the exact millisecond Barry's chest will be exposed. Arms reaching for the child, defenses down, his entire universe focused on that one tiny life. Thrag doesn't aim at Barry. He aims at the empty space of air where Barry will be in precisely 0.003 seconds. He fires a pinpoint hypersonic blast, a compression of air so intense it can shatter diamond. The world slows to a crawl for Barry Allen. He sees the blast. He sees the child, so small, so innocent, tumbling through the dusty air. He feels the vibration of the universe, the hum of the speed force that is his ally. The math is absolute, crystalline, and merciless. He can abort his run. He can save himself. But the child will be vaporized by the concussive force. To save the child, he must intersect the blast. He must place his own body, his own fragile human speedster body, directly into its path. There is no heroic monologue, no grand farewell. There is only the math and the heart that defies it. He doesn't hesitate. The sound is not loud. It is a sickening, wet crunch, like a giant stepping on a ripe melon, undercut by the sharp snap of vertebrae. The kinetic energy doesn't just hit him, it unmakes him in mid-stride. The iconic lightning bolt is snuffed out. The scarlet blur is replaced by a limp, broken ragdoll of a man hurled backwards with such force that he tears through 3 city blocks, through walls, through signs, through the very fabric of the normal world. Before his motion ends in a silent, twisted pile against the cold, unyielding foundation stone of a bank building. His suit is torn, the gold lightning cracked. One lens of his mask is shattered. He does not move. The sonic boom of his passage arrives a second later, a final mournful sigh. Thrag lands lightly on the devastated freeway. The dust settles. He looks at the still, small form of the Flash, then at the crying infant, miraculously unharmed, cradled in a crater of saved lives surrounded by debris. The other survivors are staring, first at their savior, then at the destroyer, their faces blank with a trauma too deep for screams. Thrag tilts his head, a scientist confronting an anomalous result. He walks over to the edge of the crater, looks down at the child, then back at the distant, broken red shape. His brow furrows, not with anger, but with genuine, profound perplexity. The data does not compute. His voice, when it comes, is quiet, stripped of all taunt, holding only the pure, uncomprehending curiosity of a child seeing a paradox for the first time. Why? High above, in the silent cathedral of the sky, Superman hears it. Not with his ears, but with his soul. He hears the sudden, deafening silence where there was once a heartbeat that moved faster than light, a laugh that could outrun sorrow, a spirit that was the very embodiment of life in motion. That light has been extinguished. A cry of anguish, raw, primal, and Kryptonian, tears from his throat, a sound of such loss that it momentarily stills the chaos far below. He turns, his eyes blazing with incandescent grief, seeking the source, finding the small, tragic scene painted on the canvas of Coast City. Omni-Man does not press the attack. He does not smirk. He simply watches Superman's face. He sees the cost of compassion etched there in real time, not as a theoretical weakness, but as a tangible, soul-rending pain. He sees the unwavering hope in those blue eyes dim, not with defeat, but with a sorrow so vast it threatens to become the new foundation of the man's being. And for the first time since arriving on this confounding, fragile planet, Nolan's absolute imperial certainty wavers. It is not because he doubts his strength or the might of Viltrum. It is because he is confronted with an equation, a sacrifice, that defies all logic, all survival instinct, all tenets of his empire. He cannot comprehend the variables that make such an action rational. He cannot process the answer Flash gave. In that moment, the invader is confronted not with a stronger force, but with a deeper mystery. And in the face of that mystery, the unshakable ground of his conquest begins, for the first time, to feel unstable. The medical bay in the watchtower is not merely a room, it is a cathedral of quiet agony, a sanctum where the boundary between life and ruin is measured in silent, blinking lights and the low, almost reverent hum of alien machinery. The air is cool, sterile, but it carries the electric ozone scent of the Speed Force and the faint, copper-tinged odor of human blood. In the center of the vast, circular chamber, suspended within a complex, multi-layered containment field that shimmered like a cocoon of frozen lightning, lay the Flash. Barry Allen's body was a roadmap of catastrophic trauma, a testament to forces no human anatomy was ever meant to contain, let alone channel. His costume was in tatters, fused in places to skin that was a grotesque tapestry of lacerations, fourth-degree friction burns that gleamed raw and wet, and subcutaneous hemorrhaging that painted him in deep, violent purples and blacks. The bones in his legs and right arm were a mosaic of fractures, held in alignment not by casts, but by targeted gravity beams and molecular binders. A rhythmic, soft pulse from a biomonitor was the only sign that the ruin was still a living man. He would live. The Watchtower's science, a fusion of Kryptonian, Thanagarian, and Martian technology, had decreed it. But the question of what living meant now hung in the air. A ghost in the machinery, more palpable than the holographic diagnostics floating around him. He might never run again. The price for a single life had been paid in the currency of a miracle. Superman stood vigil at the edge of the containment field, a statue of blue and red amidst the silver and white. He did not hover, did not pace. He stood with his feet firmly on the deck, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed not on the wounds but on Barry's face, peaceful in forced sedation. He had not spoken of revenge, of anger, of retribution against the being who had forced this choice. Such concepts were too small, too petty for the altar upon which this sacrifice had been made. Instead, he spoke in a low, steady voice to Diana, who stood beside him, her face a mask of Amazonian stoicism betrayed by the fire in her eyes. Her name was Lily Chen, Superman said, the words clear in the hushed space. She was 7 years old. She was on that bridge because her father had just bought her an ice cream, chocolate and sprinkles. She was afraid of the loud noise, so she ran the wrong way. Wonder Woman's jaw tightened. A child. Not a statistic, not a calculation in a strategic assessment of acceptable losses. Superman continued, his eyes never leaving Barry. A person. Barry saw her. He saw the terror on her face, the exact moment her little shoes skidded on the gravel. In that nanosecond, he didn't see the strategic imperative of stopping Omni-Man. He saw her, and he chose her. He turned his head slightly towards Diana. That choice, Diana, that willing, total self-immolation on the pyre of another's chance. It is the absolute, complete antithesis of everything Omni-Man represents. It is not a tactical error, it is a foundational truth. To Viltrum, it is the pinnacle of weakness, the subordination of the mighty to the fragile. To us, it is the source of our strength, and it is the one thing his philosophy cannot process, cannot conquer. It is our greatest weapon, and because it requires a heart that can be broken, it is also our greatest vulnerability. The silence returned, thicker now. The choice was a sacred thing in the room, a relic laid between them. On Earth, in a quiet suburban home in Colorado, a different kind of silence reigned, a silence of absence, of a life violently interrupted. The Grayson household was a museum of a dead lie. A half-eaten bowl of cereal sat on the kitchen table, the milk souring. The TV was off, the remote lying on the carpet where it had fallen. Debbie was gone, evacuated by a grim-faced GDA agent who offered no comfort, only swift, efficient relocation to a secure bunker. Mark Grayson stood in the living room, still in his torn and bloodied superhero suit, the eye on his chest smudged with dirt and ash. He felt hollow, scooped out. The adrenaline of the fight, the terror of the bridge, the awe at the Flash's sacrifice had all burned away, leaving a cold, ashy core of disillusionment. His father, Nolan, stood by the fireplace, still in his Viltrumite uniform, its white marred by soot and a long, scorched tear across the shoulder. He was staring at the empty hearth, his back to his son, his posture rigid with an imperial certainty that now seemed to fill the room like a poison gas. "You watched," Mark said. His voice wasn't loud. It was flat, hollow, the sound of something breaking deep inside. "You stood there, and you watched that hero break himself. You saw him push himself so far past his limits that he came apart, molecule by molecule, to save one person. One little girl you wouldn't have even noticed. And you call him weak." Nolan didn't turn. "He is weak, Mark." The words were a low rumble, but they lacked their usual effortless conviction. They were forced out, as if against resistance. He allowed a transient emotional attachment to a single, insignificant life to cripple the defense of an entire planet. In that moment, he abdicated his responsibility to the greater whole. That sentiment, that maudlin, primitive clinging, it is a cancer. It clouds judgment. It leads to extinction. A cancer? The hollowness in Mark's voice filled with a sudden, scalding heat. "Then what is this?" He lunged forward, not at his father, but to the mantelpiece. He grabbed a simple silver frame holding a photo, the three of them at the state fair last summer. Mark, gangly and grinning, was holding a giant teddy bear. Debbie had her arm around his waist, laughing, her head thrown back. Nolan stood behind them, his hands on their shoulders, a genuine, unguarded smile on his face, his eyes crinkled at the corners. It was the picture of a happy family. Mark shoved the photo hard against his father's armored chest. The glass didn't break, but it rattled in the frame. "What do you call this?" Mark screamed, the dam finally bursting. Was this a tactic? Was her laughter a strategic resource? Was teaching me how to throw a baseball, or grilling burgers on Sundays, or holding her when she cried after her mom died? Was that all just part of the mission? Nolan finally turned. He looked down at the photo pressed against the symbol on his chest. He saw his own face, the smiling human face of Nolan Grayson, husband, father, staring back at him from behind the glass. The crack in his psychological armor, first opened on the bridge, widened with a seismic groan. The raw, unfiltered pain in his son's eyes was a weapon for which Viltrum had no defense. His large, powerful hand came up and snatched the frame from Mark's grip. For a terrifying second, Mark thought he would crush it, reducing the memory to powdered glass and splinters, proving his point with final, brutal clarity. But he didn't. Nolan held it. His knuckles were white around the silver. He stared at the image, his brows drawn together in a storm of confusion and a dawning, horrific realization. The tremor that began in his hand was minute, almost imperceptible, but to Mark it was as shocking as an earthquake. This man, who could punch through mountains, was trembling, holding a picture frame. Nolan's voice was a ragged whisper, stripped of all its belligerent power. He wasn't looking at Mark, he was confessing to the smiling ghost in the photo. It was a complication. The word dropped from his lips like something dead, tasting of ashes and regret. The word hung between them, more devastating than any insult. Complication. His family, his love, his life. Not a lie, not even a tactic. Something worse, an unforeseen variable that had corrupted the purity of the mission. And in that moment, Mark saw not the invincible conqueror, but a man who had just realized with soul-crushing certainty that he had spent 20 years poisoning the only well that had ever given him true water. The final battle was not a duel. It was a referendum. A public, global, violent plebiscite on two opposing doctrines of power. Omni-Man, seeking to erase the cognitive dissonance the Justice League and his own family had forced upon him, decided on a grand, symbolic gesture. He would tear their symbol of hope from the sky. He would dismantle the watchtower, orbital seat of their naive unity, and paint the heavens with its wreckage, a demonstration of ultimate power that would shatter Earth's spirit once and for all. He launched his assault not in stealth, but in a blaze of ominous light, a red streak ascending from the Rockies like a reverse meteor of doom, visible across half a continent. He was met in the high atmosphere just as the black of space began to bleed into the deep blue of the sky. Superman waited for him, the Earth a vast, beautiful curvature below, the watchtower a distant silver star at his back. There were no more words to be exchanged. The time for philosophy was over. Now there was only action. This time, Superman did not hold back. But his not holding back was not what Nolan expected. It was not a descent into mindless, matching brutality. As Nolan charged, a crimson missile of pure destructive intent, Superman moved. It was not a dodge, nor a simple, braced block. He met the charge with controlled, precise counterforce. He shifted his weight a fraction, turned his shoulder, and redirected Nolan's planet-shaking punch with a circular motion of his own arm, using the Viltrumite's momentum to send him spiraling past. As Nolan recovered, snarling, Superman struck. Not a wild haymaker, but a pinpoint punch to the jaw that snapped Nolan's head to the side and corrected his orbital trajectory, preventing him from veering towards a satellite cluster. "Stand and fight!" Nolan roared, coming back with a blistering combination of punches that could crater a continent. Superman weaved, parried, absorbed. He was a fortress, but an active one. A heat vision blast, usually a weapon of pure destruction, lanced out, not to bisect Nolan, but to slice through the clasp of his cape. The heavy fabric fluttered away, a symbolic stripping of the imperial mantle. "I am fighting," Superman said, his voice calm even as he caught a fist that could pulverize a moon, the shockwave rippling out into the vacuum with a silent boom. "I'm fighting for the idea that you're wrong, and I'll fight for that idea for as long as it takes, a minute, a century, however long it takes for you to see." Enraged, Nolan changed tactics. He seized Superman in a crushing bear hug and dove earthward. They became a twin meteor, a screaming column of plasma and fury, punching through the cloud layers over the Pacific. Superman didn't try to break the hold immediately. Instead, he worked on their angle. As they fell, he exerted torque, shifting their deadly plunge away from the scattered islands of Polynesia, steering them towards the vast, empty expanse of the Southern Ocean. They hit the water with a cataclysm that sent a tsunami radiating outward. But it was in an empty sea. They erupted from the depths seconds later, locked in combat, skimming across the surface, their flight path boiling a trench in the ocean. Nolan hurled Superman into the side of a non-populated Alaskan mountain range, shattering glaciers. Superman absorbed the impact, rolled with the force, and used his rebound to tackle Nolan across the tundra, away from any pipeline or settlement, their wake drawing a line of fire and destruction across the permafrost. The world watched. Every satellite, every GDA drone, every news helicopter at a safe, terrified distance broadcast the battle. They saw two gods. One, a being of red and rage who treated the planet as his anvil to be smashed upon. The other, a being of blue and resolve who used the same anvil, but in every movement placed his own body between the hammer and anything precious, herding the apocalypse into deserts, oceans, and ice. He was not just fighting Omni-Man, he was fighting for the Earth, with a care that was itself a form of supreme power. The cost in collateral was still monstrous. Forests leveled, seas boiled, new canyons carved. But it was calculated, minimized. It was the difference between a surgeon navigating a tumor and a butcher cleaving meat. Invincible joined the fray over the Sahara, where Superman had finally succeeded in corralling the conflict. Mark didn't charge his father. He had seen the flash. He had felt the hollowness in his home. He watched Superman, the blueprint of a different kind of hero. So he followed the lead. When a blow from Omni-Man sheared the top off a massive butte, sending millions of tons of rock tumbling toward a nomadic caravan's route miles below, it was Mark who intercepted the largest boulders, shattering them into harmless gravel. When the shockwave of their clash toppled a long-range GDA communications spire, it was Mark who caught the falling structure, his muscles screaming, and guided its slow, controlled fall into an empty dune. He became a living example of the alternative path, a testament to the strength found in protection, not domination. Nolan, increasingly frenzied, felt the battle slipping away. He was not being overpowered, but he was being managed, contained. It was an insult beyond endurance. In a final, furious gambit to break the paradigm, he feinted a charge at Superman, then changed direction with blinding speed, seizing the Man of Steel from behind in a full Nelson. With a titanic, guttural roar that echoed across the desert, he used every ounce of his strength, augmented by a devastating dive, to hurl Superman not at the Earth, but away from it. He hurled him sunward. The tactic was brutally clever. He knew Kryptonians drew power from the yellow sun. His hope was to overcharge Superman's cells to the point of catastrophic rupture, to flood the engine until it exploded. Superman, caught in the grip, became a projectile, accelerating out of the atmosphere, the blue sky darkening to black, the sun swelling from a disk to a raging cosmic furnace. But Superman did not panic. He did not fight the momentum immediately. He let it carry him, feeling the intense, bathing radiation of his home star begin to flood his senses with near overwhelming power. At the perfect moment, as Earth began to shrink behind him, he acted. He twisted in the grip of Nolan's throw, used his own solar-amped strength not to resist, but to redirect. He turned himself into the anchor of a cosmic slingshot. He arrested his outward velocity and, using Nolan's own immense force as the initial catalyst, reversed it. Now he was the projectile, and Earth was the target. But he was in control. He wrapped his energy around Nolan, who had been following close, expecting to see him boil away. Instead, he found himself locked in a desperate struggle as they plummeted back into the atmosphere, not as a helpless meteor, but as a guided missile, a burning arc of two entwined figures screaming back towards the Sahara, trailing not just fire, but Superman's deliberate, contained will. As they fell, locked in a struggle that was now as much psychic and ideological as physical, Nolan saw it. A massive, half-shattered GDA monitoring screen mounted on a wrecked mobile command post miles below had somehow survived the shockwaves. Its feed was glitchy, fragmented, but clear enough. And on it, being broadcast to the troops and by feed sharing to the world, was a live image from a secure bunker. It was Debbie. She sat on a stark cot, her face pale, stained with tears that had carved clean tracks through a layer of dust and fear. She was watching the battle feed, but she wasn't watching the spectacle of the two super beings. Her eyes were fixed on him, on Nolan, on Omni-Man. And her expression, it was not the terror he might have expected. It was not even the fiery hatred he had seen from the Amazon or the Kryptonian. It was something far more devastating. It was pity. Shattered, heartbroken, profound pity. The look you give a rabid animal or a once great man now lost to madness. It was the look that said, I see the monster you have become, and I mourn the man I loved who is trapped inside it. Pity. For him, the conqueror, the Viltrumite, the being who had laughed at the weakness of sentiment. That look bypassed all his indoctrination, all his imperial logic about strength and destiny. It slipped past the armor, past the bone, and struck directly at the human heart he had spent 2 decades carefully cultivating as a cover, only to have it become real, and then had tried with increasing desperation to smother. It was the ultimate negation. To be hated is to be acknowledged as a threat. To be feared is to be granted power. To be pitied is to be seen as a tragedy, a failure. His grip, both physical and metaphysical, faltered. The absolute certainty that was the bedrock of his strength developed a fissure that ran straight to its core. Superman felt it the instant it happened. It was not a weakening of muscle, but a collapse of will. In that opening, he could have delivered a killing blow, a heat vision blast to the temple, a fist driven through the chest, an end to the threat. He did not. He simply broke the hold. He unlocked Nolan's arms and pushed him away, not with explosive force, but with a firm, separating shove. Their plummet, now uncontrolled by Nolan's rage, became a slower, crashing descent. They hit the desert not as a single planet-cracking impact, but as two separate entities, carving twin trenches of glass and fire 100 yards apart. The dust rose in a silent, expanding cloud, then began to settle under the merciless sun. Nolan rose first, slowly from his crater. The fine, fused silica of the newly made glass crunched under his boots. He was not defeated. He had barely a scratch on him. His power was undiminished. But he was disintegrated. The internal equation of Viltrumite supremacy, strength equals right, sentiment equals death, no longer balanced. It lay in ruins, and he stood amidst the psychic wreckage, exposed and utterly lost. He looked at his son. Mark hovered at the crater's rim, having landed softly. He had no triumphant glare, no victorious pose. His face was a mirror of his mother's, etched with that same heartbreaking pity, but mixed with a desperate, pleading hope. Please, please see it. He looked at Superman. The Kryptonian stood across from him, his cape torn, his suit scuffed, a thin line of golden blood tracing from his lower lip. He was battered, breathing deeply, but unbowed. His stance was not one of attack, but of continued, unwavering defense. Ready to continue, for hours, days, years, defending a world that was not even his own, simply because it was right. Because its people, in all their fragile, sentimental glory, were worth defending. Finally, Nolan looked at his own hands, the hands that had shattered worlds, that had slain countless beings across the galaxy for the glory of the Viltrumite Empire. Tools of conquest, instruments of a brutal, logical destiny. They were also the hands that had held his infant son so carefully, afraid his strength would hurt him. The hands that had fixed a leaky faucet on a Sunday afternoon. The hands that had held Debbie's face and wiped away her tears. The silence in the desert was absolute, a physical pressure. It was filled only by the mournful howl of a wind sweeping across the newly created sea of glass, singing a dirge for a fallen ideology. Nolan's shoulders, which had carried the weight of empires, did not slump in physical defeat. They collapsed under the unbearable, universe-crushing weight of a choice he could no longer avoid. The choice between the empire he was born to serve and the family he had chosen to create. Between the cold, perfect strength of Viltrum and the warm, complicated, vulnerable strength he had just witnessed tear his own certainty apart. He stood there in the ruins of the desert and the ruins of his purpose and said nothing. The fight was over. The war within him had just begun. The desert wind howled, then settled into a whisper, scouring the cracked earth and carrying diamonds of fused sand that glittered like fallen stars. In the center of the devastation, Omni-Man did not surrender. Surrender implied a conceding of principles, an admission of a lost cause. For Nolan, the cause was lost, but the principles were shattered, and there was nothing left to concede to. He simply stopped. The coiled spring of his body, a weapon that had leveled cities, unwound. His fists, slick with the blood of heroes and innocents alike, unclenched. He stood amidst the wreckage of his own ideology, looking at the sun he had tried to break, the peers he had tried to murder, and the world he had been ordained to conquer. He sank to one knee, not in supplication, but in exhaustion. The cosmic dust of 100 conquered worlds felt heavy on his shoulders. "The fleet comes in 5 years," he said, his voice stripped of its imperial resonance, now just the tired rasp of a man who had seen the end of his own story. "They will not be reasoned with. They will not be impressed by your moral stands, your monuments, your courage. They will see this world's defiance, the scars of my failure, and they will scour it clean to set an example for the next. A sterilization. They will make a crater where your planet spins, a warning etched in the asteroid belt. He looked at Mark, and for the first time, Mark saw not the invincible warrior, the terrifying patriarch, the herald of empire, but his father, flawed, broken, hopelessly lost. The veneer of Viltrumite certainty had cracked, revealing the terrifying vulnerability beneath. I have doomed you either way, Nolan whispered, the words carried away by the dry wind. By my success or by my failure, I have painted a target on your home. I came to spare you the pain of resistance. Now, I have only guaranteed you a more brutal end. Superman landed softly, his cape settling like a crimson shroud over the shattered ground. He did not stand over Nolan, but beside him, a quiet parity in their posture. No, Kal-El said, his voice firm yet devoid of gloating. You've given them a chance. You showed them the true face of the enemy. And more importantly, you showed them they can survive him. You taught them the cost, and in doing so, you showed them what is worth the cost. That is not a doom. That is a first lesson, the hardest one. The decision of what to do with Omni-Man fractured the temporary unity of the League. Diana argued for containment, for using Amazonian magics and Kryptonian science to forge a prison that could hold him. A testament to justice. Hal Jordan saw only a continued threat, a rogue weapon too dangerous to leave unsecured. But it was Batman's analysis, cold, clinical, and irrefutable, that carried the day. Holding him is a fantasy born of a desire for punitive closure, Bruce stated, his holographic display floating in the damaged war room of the Watchtower. Data streams cascaded. Energy requirements, historical precedents of holding godlike beings, psychological profiles. The energy drain alone would cripple our defensive capabilities for the coming conflict. More critically, a captive Omni-Man becomes a symbol. To Viltrum, a martyr to recover. To a frightened Earth, a lightning rod for either vengeful hatred or sympathetic fascination. He becomes a focus, a beacon. His very presence in a cell would distort everything we do. It would make him central to the narrative of Earth's resistance. He cannot be central. Earth must stand on its own. The solution, when it came, was more profound and infinitely more dangerous. They let him go. It was not an act of forgiveness, nor mercy in the traditional sense. It was a strategic and moral calculus of staggering risk. They presented him with a choice, not of punishment, but of path. Superman delivered the terms, standing at the airlock of the Watchtower, the infinite starfield behind him. Your ship is repaired. Your strength has returned. You can leave, Superman said, his blue eyes holding Nolan's. Not to Viltrum, not to report, to go elsewhere, to see what your empire builds and to see what it destroys, to live with the choice you've made here today, to live with the knowledge of what your son chose to be in the shadow of what you tried to make him. Omni-Man left Earth not as a victor or a vanquished foe, but as an exile from his own certainty. The grand design of Viltrumite supremacy, the unassailable logic of the strong ruling the weak, lay in ruins around him, not because it had been defeated by greater strength, but because it had been rendered incomprehensible by something else. He paused on the dark side of the moon, the blue marble of Earth hanging in the velvet black, half lit by the sun. He did not see a resource, a breeding ground, a strategic asset. He saw Debbie's face, not filled with hatred for his betrayal, but with a profound, devastating pity for his blindness. He saw Mark, in the heat of their cataclysmic battle, twisting away to catch a falling skyscraper full of people instead of landing a killing blow. He saw the Flash, a human with bones of glass and a spirit of diamond, shattering his own body to buy milliseconds for others. He saw the Kryptonian, holding back, pulling punches, fighting to subdue rather than to exterminate. The cold, elegant calculus of conquest had no variables for these actions. They were irrational. They were inefficient. They were, by Viltrumite standards, fatal weaknesses. And yet, they had withstood him. The seed of doubt was planted deep in the cracked bedrock of his soul, and it was a more devastating weapon than any heat vision or omega beam. It was a quiet, persistent question that would echo in the silence of deep space. What if they are right and we are wrong? In the aftermath, the Justice League was changed. The Watchtower bore deep scars across its hull and its decks. The medbay was a quiet place of slow, painful recovery. The Flash, encased in a stabilizer field, his metabolism forced to a crawl to allow his shattered skeleton to re-knit, found a new kind of velocity. He taught a brilliant, awestruck young CSI technician from Central City, who had bypassed a dozen security protocols just to visit his hero, how to process a microscopic crime scene with a patience he once embodied in speed. The lesson passed on, not in a blur, but with careful, deliberate words, speed of thought, not just of foot. Batman spent 72 hours in continuous consultation with Cecil Stedman and the Global Defense Agency's top strategists. He left them not with just schematics for better weapons or shields, but with a complete, chilling strategic analysis of the Viltrumite Empire. It covered not only their physiological thresholds and combat tactics, but their imperial psychology, their logistical dependencies, the social fractures inherent in a supremacist hierarchy, the potential leverage points of client worlds and subjugated species. Fight them with their own cold logic, Batman advised, his voice a grating whisper over the secure line. Exploit their arrogance, their predictability, their resource lines. But remember why you're fighting. The moment you adopt their methods, the moment you sacrifice your own citizens for the greater good, the moment you become them to defeat them, you've already lost. The war and your soul. Wonder Woman sought out Adam Eve. She found the young hero not on a training field, but in a temporary housing facility, using her powers to quietly reassemble shattered toys for traumatized children. Diana did not speak for a long moment, simply watching creation act as an act of healing. Finally, she approached and offered not a weapon, but a broken piece of her own silver bracelets, a fragment sheared off in the battle. The strength to destroy is common, Diana said, her voice thick with the memory of Themyscira and a century of war. The strength to create, to build, to mend, that is the truest, rarest strength. They will try to make you only a weapon. The universe will demand it of you. Do not let them. This fragment, let it remind you that even the strongest defense can be broken, but the will to rebuild is unbreakable. Superman's final meeting was with Mark. They stood on the bare, cleared ground where the Guardians of the Globe's monument once stood. The rubble was gone, and a simple temporary plaque listed the names of the fallen. A new permanent one was being designed. The debate raged over whether to include the names of the Chicago dead, the civilians caught in the crossfire of a galactic war they never knew existed, Mark believed they should. I don't know if I can be what you are, Mark admitted, his gaze fixed on the iconic S shield on Superman's chest. The hope, the symbol. I got my dad back, sort of, but I lost him all over again. I'm angry. I'm scared. For 5 years from now, for tomorrow. Superman listened, his face a mask of quiet understanding. He had heard similar fears from others, in other worlds, in other times. I'm not asking you to be me, Mark, he said, finally placing a steady hand on the young man's shoulder. My path was different. I'm asking you to be what he couldn't be. A bridge between the man your father was, the one who loved your mother, who read you stories, who wanted to protect you, and the hero your world needs now. Between Viltrum's power and Earth's heart, to hold both truths at once, that's harder than any battle, and more important than any symbol. The dimensional fracture that had brought the League to this universe, stabilized by Cyborg and the combined genius of the Batcave and the GDA, hummed with contained energy. It was a two-way door. Their work here was done. It was not a story of victorious liberation. They had not toppled the Viltrumite Empire. They had not won a war. They had fought a single, brutal, defensive action. They had fortified a world's soul. As the Watchtower initiated its phased return sequence, withdrawing from this reality like a stone slipping beneath the surface of a pond, the League gathered on the observation deck. They looked down one last time at the swirling blue and white marble. They saw a world still scarred, physically and psychically. They saw the fear in news reports, the political upheaval as governments grappled with the existence of extraterrestrial threats and domestic superbeings. They saw Cecil Stedman's GDA facing protests and congressional hearings over its secrecy and its power. But they also saw pockets of fierce, defiant light. Vigils not just for the superheroes, but for the civilians of Chicago. Grassroots movements demanding oversight, but also unity. Monuments being sketched on architects' tablets dedicated not to a victory, but to the save, the principle that protecting life was the highest heroic ideal. They saw a young hero named Invincible, his suit still new and unblemished, standing on a rooftop beside a young woman who could weave matter from energy. They were not just discussing patrol routes or threat responses. They were deep in debate, their gestures earnest, their faces serious. They were arguing ethics, the responsibility of power, the price of a life. The Justice League did not bring peace to this universe. Peace was a fragile, distant dream, now overshadowed by the storm cloud of an approaching armada. What they brought was more volatile, more transformative, and far more dangerous. They brought a virus called choice. They demonstrated that there was always an alternative to the ruthless binary of conquer or be conquered. They left behind the dangerous, chaotic, painful gift of self-determination, armed with the terrible knowledge of what was coming. They left the conviction, etched in the fire of their defense, that some prices were too high to pay, even for survival. That a victory bought with the sacrifice of one's compassion, one's mercy, one's very soul, was the ultimate defeat. That strength without moral compass was just a louder, more efficient form of tyranny. The view screen did not fade on a triumphant league soaring into the sun. It faded on the somber, resolute, and unyielding faces of Earth's new defenders. Mark Grayson, Samantha Eve Wilkins, the teen team, battered but unbowed. Cecil Stedman, already barking orders into a headset. They stood on a ridge in a command center on a city street, all looking up at the same sky. At a fading ripple of light, the last signature of a door closing between dimensions. They were alone now, but they were not the same. The war was coming. In 5 years, the heavens would tear open with fire and thunder, and an empire would descend to finish what a single soldier had begun. But the ground would not be prepared for them. It would not be a compliant planet of kneeling subjects waiting for the yoke. It would be a world that had learned to stand.